Hi class, I hope everything's going well for you all. I would like to let you guys know that I'm going to post some of the extra credit stuff by Friday of this week. So keep your eyes out for that if that's something you're interested in. All the midterm grades are up. I think all the quiz grades should be posted, so you should have an idea of what as we head towards your final grade. We've got a lot of assignments, some little, some larger, in this last third of the semester now. A lot of things coming up, including your papers. I've posted, I think it was last week, not this week. I think it was last week. And kind of a sample paper that's well written, which you might think about if you have any questions about topics, because your topic proposals are due by this Friday. Just email me and I'll try and help you out as much as I can. And let's see. So basically this week we're doing book 2 of Troilus and Cressida. In this book we see the romance between Troilus and Cressida really begin. Well, at least we see the wheels start to turn. Really, in this book, you should sort of see Pandarus living up to his name in the sense that he's really the go-between between Troilus and Cressida. And, in fact, you should start to think this resembles a lot a middle school type of romance. And it really does. Both characters seem to be... well, I don't know if both characters, but Pandarus and the way he interacts with both characters and then fosters the relationship between both characters is very adolescent in its way. And that's not entirely unreasonable to think that they may actually have been adolescents. Troilus himself is probably somewhere between 14 and 18, maybe up to 20, but he's quite young, I guarantee you that. We don't have an exact age on him, but most knights of his age, not yet married, would fall in that age range. And Cressida, even though she's a widow, would probably fall in a similar age range. She has no children yet, so one might have assumed she was married, but maybe not married for a long time. Her husband was probably older than her and passed, or probably died in the war. And then, so this is kind of the situation we come to with these two characters. And maybe because Cressida is a widow, and of course she's got to be very aware of her situation in the city. She has to live very, very modestly because her father is guilty of treason, and even though she's been kind of pardoned, as it were, she just has to be careful because her position could be threatened since he's gone over to the Greeks and she's his daughter. She has to be careful, and so she's really, I think, taken aback when Pandarus comes to her house. She and her ladies they're just kind of relaxing and reading a nice romance and taking things easy, and he comes in and he starts talking about this man who loves her, and that to her is not appropriate. She's not incredibly upset about the person. She's just upset that her uncle, I think, would suggest she partake in such behavior when most people's expectations of her are modesty. And she kind of berates him for that. She's very reluctant to start any kind of relationship. She does finally agree to write a letter to Troilus, but only kind of in a sort of friendly way, not to encourage him overly much. And, of course, Troilus responds, as one might think he would, being that he's so love-struck, thinking of it only as a sign of her undying sort of love, or at least hope that he can win her love, and because she doesn't respond to him, at least in a cruel way. And lovers kind of sometimes can do that. They can read too much into situations, and I think that's what you get here, that we have Cressida's reluctant response out of respect for her uncle and his desires, and Troilus's hopeful response, because Pandarus is obviously much more concerned with Troilus and his happiness than he is with his niece, though you might think family ties were stronger. They just are not in this instance. Pandarus, in fact, kind of is a bit of a slimy character. He should seem that way. Like I said, the word pander means to pimp, and is understood that way. It was considered a sin at the time. And he's named very deliberately that way also for that reason. And so we have this kind of interesting turnaround, and then of course we have the story ending, or this book ending, with Pandarus kind of arranging for them to meet up at Dave Phoebus's house, and they're just kind of, like I said, that we've got the beginnings of a relationship, and they do in fact fall in love despite Cressida's early reluctance. She does change her mind and fall for Troilus, but that's later on, not in this book. We just have the initial stirrings of that situation coming to fruition. And the big thing that a lot of critics have noticed about this story, especially at this stage of the story, is the fact that Cressida's reading is kind of interesting, because a lot of people, when they think of the Middle Ages and they think of literacy in the Middle Ages, they tend to think of people, well, only the wealthy having access to literacy. They probably don't think a whole lot about women reading. They think probably more men were the scholars. And for a large part that was true, but that doesn't mean especially upper class women didn't have access to learning and to knowledge. In fact, one of the links provided this week is about two figures, Heloise and Abelard. Abelard is actually a very well-known medieval thinker and philosopher, especially in terms of religious ideas. And what's so beautiful about their story, and it was real, totally real, their story, is that he falls for this young woman who's very intelligent and has actually been trained in rhetoric and has an education. And the fact that she's so smart makes him fall for her. And they have this illicit love affair. It's this private sort of thing. They do get married. She becomes pregnant and they go get married. And he has kind of given up his studies because he's so much in love with her. Well, when her guardian finds out, he basically has Abelard castrated, and they're both forced into monasteries. She is forced into an abbey to become a nun, and he's forced into a monastery. And they write love letters to each other for the rest of their lives. And of course, this is the point at which he begins to really come up with a lot more of his philosophy, because he can't have a marriage relationship with Heloise. And her baby, once it's born, is actually taken from her and given away. And it's just this really kind of sad but beautiful story, the fact that even after they're no longer physically able to live together as husband and wife, they continue to write love letters, that sentiment doesn't leave them. And they write love letters not just about love, but also about philosophical ideas and stuff back and forth. It's just this beautiful story. Really, really neat. And it's interesting because you see that same sort of exchange going on here with Troilus and Cressida, this sort of secret sort of thing. It's got to be kept secret again. Cressida's modesty is at stake and her position. But definitely the exchange of letters and love letters at this time was very important. And the fact that they're both writing the letters and they're both receiving the letters tells us something about their literacy. And one of the things you may not have known, but we do have studies that have shown somewhat that what was common at the time, especially among, we'll say, upper middle classes and the upper class, was that occasionally a younger child and a younger girl child would actually be taught to read, because it was considered a service to the family, and it should be the lowest one on the totem pole, that would read to the rest of the family. And this would be kind of like a movie or playing a video game today. This was their entertainment. And often they could not afford many books because, of course, it was so laborious to produce a book. And so a family might have one or two books only, but those one or two books might be very large, and they might have a lot of different stories in them. And the youngest child would get up and would read to the rest of the families in the evenings. It was a very oral reading kind of tradition, which is what you see with Cressida and her ladies, that they're reading together in an oral way. And so women's literacy, there's also another link this week about how much women did actually read, that it's kind of surprising in the Middle Ages. And so, no, certainly you don't have like the 98th percentile of literacy rate, which I do think is a little skewed, that we represent today. But it's probably not quite as small of a literacy rate as we might think it was, that some people did have access. And of course, at the time, to be literate meant to read Latin. Many more people could read in the vernacular than could read Latin. And to us, reading in the vernacular would probably be being literate. to a great degree. And it's just that most of the books of learning were in Latin. And so you might not have access to as much of the higher learning ideas and ideals unless you could read Latin. And certainly you didn't have access to the Bible because it was in Latin. And having access to the Bible and the information of the Bible was so important in a society where spirituality was so central. But just these ideas as they come up in this section, the ideas of reading, the ideas of literacy, the ideas of communication between lovers, and the importance of privacy. The 10 Commandments of Love kind of give some of the central ideas of how one is supposed to perform correct courtly love. We briefly talked about some of the courtly love and how it arises in The Knight's Tale and how the miller kind of calls it into question in the Canterbury Tales, but you're going to really see it masterfully presented in all of its glory and sort of ickiness too in this work. Like I said, most people consider this Chaucer's masterpiece. It is complete, unlike the Canterbury Tales. And even though it's not as engaging in some ways it's also more beautiful. It's tragic, yes, as we've already discussed, but also beautiful. And the way it's written is, and the way it's crafted so very carefully, is why we can see Chaucer as the father of English poetry. He was very, very careful with his language and very, very popular in his day and for a long time afterwards because of his art and his ability to write in the vernacular. And he's really the one, I believe, that starts the movement that writing in the vernacular is a positive thing. And, we see that more and more in the Renaissance, that people begin to write more in vernacular languages instead of in Latin. And certainly ideas of literacy change a lot there. So we just have a lot of really interesting ideas about the period and changes that are kind of forthcoming that are presented in this kind of section where there's not a whole lot of action, but nevertheless some important underlying threads are being woven that lead to the main action of the story in the next couple of books. And so again, I hope you enjoyed this, and like I said, I will also have the extra credit stuff posted by the end of this week. We have the quiz this week. Please get your topic proposals to me. Those don't have to be very long, just a couple of sentences or so about what you want to write about, and email them to me. That'll work for me, just so long as I get them by Friday to know you're thinking about it. Anyway, so if you have any more questions, just let me know, email me, and I'll see you next week.